Kanika Powell wrote the blueprint of her own murder and sent it to her family. She predicted every detail, yet she still couldn't escape the assassins waiting in the hallway. August 2008 found 28-year-old Kanika Powell barricaded inside her Laurel, Maryland apartment. For 5 agonizing days, a rotating cast of strangers tried to trick her into opening her door. She knew someone was coming for her, and she left behind a digital trail to prove it. Kanika Powell was not someone prone to paranoia. She didn't live a high-risk lifestyle, and she wasn't involved with drugs or gangs. Instead, she was a highly cleared security contractor for the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. This was a facility handling some of the most sensitive national security and defense contracts in the United States. Yet, over the span of a single week, she became the target of a coordinated psychological siege. The people hunting her didn't just kick down the door. They used sophisticated social engineering, adopting multiple disguises to test her defenses. They posed as FBI agents with fake badges and delivery drivers with packages that didn't exist. Through it all, Kanika sat in her living room, typing out detailed emails to her family. She documented every terrifying encounter, every strange knock, and every suspicious vehicle. She was creating a real-time dossier of her own stalking. She did everything right by calling the police and arming herself, but the trap was already set. The people waiting in the shadows possessed a level of tactical patience that suggests they were far more than common criminals. Something about her work at the lab might have made her a target, a secret that would only become clear much later. In this investigation, we are going to walk through the exact sequence of events that led to Kanika's execution, day by terrifying day. We will read the very emails she sent from the darkness of her apartment. These messages read less like cries for help and more like tactical intelligence reports from a soldier trapped behind enemy lines. We are going to explore the disturbing anomalies surrounding her death, including the fact that nothing was stolen and the chilling precision of the ambush itself. We have to consider the dark shadow cast by her top-secret clearance. Was she targeted because of what she knew, or was this a case of mistaken identity orchestrated by a remarkably disciplined hit squad? By the time we reach the end of her final email, you will understand why seasoned homicide detectives still lose sleep over this case. The silence surrounding her murder is perhaps the most deafening of all. Prepare to step into the hallway of a nightmare that was meticulously planned, ruthlessly executed, and entirely predicted by the victim herself. This is the story of a woman who saw her own end coming and tried to warn the world. To understand the terror of Kanika's final days, you have to understand the world she lived in. Laurel, Maryland, is a quiet suburb nestled between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. It is a town heavily populated by government employees and intelligence contractors due to its proximity to Fort Meade and the NSA. Kanika's apartment complex was typical for the area, bland, secure, and filled with professionals who kept to themselves. It was the last place you would expect a covert operation to unfold. However, Kanika's professional life was anything but ordinary. At the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, she worked in a world governed by strict security protocols and classified networks. Her job required extreme situational awareness. She was trained to spot anomalies and recognize when things didn't add up. So, when a man first knocked on her door on a Saturday afternoon, claiming to be an FBI agent, her instincts flared immediately. The man held up a badge, but it looked flimsy, lacking the holographic seals she was used to seeing. He knew her name, but his demeanor was all wrong. He wasn't acting like an investigator. He was acting like a predator, testing a fence. In that moment, Miles away from her secure laboratory, Kanika realized her personal sanctuary had been breached. The siege had begun, and as we will see, this wasn't the only time these men would show up with a fake identity. Kanika Powell was a force of nature. Her family describes her as fiercely independent and deeply protective of those she loved. At 28, she had already served in the military before transitioning into the competitive world of defense contracting. She was a veteran, and she wasn't easily rattled. When you look at photographs of her, you see a bright, confident smile of a woman in control. She was close to her mother and shared the mundane details of her life, but she also understood the gravity of her work. She didn't bring her job home, and she never boasted about her security clearance. This makes the tone of her emails even more chilling. When she documented the men at her door, she didn't write with panic. She used the cold, analytical precision of a trained observer documenting an active threat. She noted physical descriptions, estimated heights, clothing brands, and the specific cadence of their speech. She was gathering intelligence on her own hunters, ensuring that if something happened, there would be a record. She was a warrior, trapped in a domestic cage, using the only weapon she had left, her keyboard. She saw right through their disguises and outsmarted them at every turn, refusing to give them the easy access they wanted. But her intelligence and training ultimately forced her attackers to abandon their subtle tactics for something far more brutal, a move that suggests they couldn't afford to let her live. The first email was sent on a Saturday. Kanika sat at her computer and typed out a message to her family detailing a bizarre encounter. A man had just knocked on her door, claiming to be from the FBI. He told her there was an investigation in the area and asked her to open up. But Kanika, peering through the peephole, immediately noticed red flags. The man's badge looked like a cheap prop. He didn't have the authoritative posture of federal law enforcement. And most importantly, he was alone, and FBI agents rarely, if ever, conduct residential interviews without a partner. Kanika calmly refused to open the door. She told him to leave a card, but he claimed he didn't have one. Instead, he lingered in the hallway, his polite facade slipping to reveal a simmering frustration. When he finally walked away, Kanika called the local police to report the incident. The police arrived, took a report, and essentially told her there was nothing they could do since no crime had technically been committed. They suggested it might be a scam artist or a prank, but Kanika knew better. The man had used her name. He knew exactly which apartment was hers in a complex filled with hundreds of identical doors. She wrote to her family, expressing her unease, stating clearly that she felt she was being targeted. This wasn't a random door-to-door salesman. This was a probe. The enemy was testing her perimeter, evaluating her responses, and gathering data for their next move. The chilling reality was setting in. Whoever this was, they weren't going to simply walk away because she refused to open the door. They were going to try again. Over the next 4 days, the psychological warfare escalated with terrifying speed. The men returned, but this time they changed their tactics. They abandoned the FBI ruse and adopted the guise of delivery drivers. A man claiming to be a courier knocked, insisting he had a package that required her signature. Kanika, once again looking through the peephole, saw a man holding a nondescript box. He didn't wear a uniform. There was no delivery truck visible in the parking lot. She asked him to leave the package at the door, but he aggressively insisted that she had to open the door and sign for it personally. This creates an agonizing moral dilemma. Every instinct in a normal person says to just open the door, take the package, and end the awkward social interaction. Society trains us to be polite, to comply with basic requests, to not cause a scene. But Kanika's survival instincts were screaming at her to keep the deadbolt thrown. She had to actively fight against the deeply ingrained human urge to just open the door and resolve the situation. She refused. The man became agitated, demanding she open up, his voice echoing in the quiet hallway. When she threatened to call the police, he finally retreated, taking the mysterious package with him. Kanika fired off another email, her words now carrying a heavy, metallic edge of true fear. The men were adapting. They were trying to manufacture a scenario where she would willingly compromise her own security. And the most terrifying part was the sheer persistence. Most criminals looking for an easy robbery would have given up after the first failed attempt. These men were investing days into breaching a single apartment, indicating a specific, targeted objective that went far beyond mere theft. As the days bled into one another, the situation grew increasingly surreal, and the evidence began to contradict itself in bizarre ways. Kanika called the police multiple times, but every time the cruisers pulled into the apartment complex, the men vanished like ghosts. The police found no suspicious vehicles, no lingering individuals matching the detailed descriptions Kanika provided. To the responding officers, it started to look like the paranoid delusions of a stressed woman living alone. There was no physical evidence of an attempted break-in, no scratched lock, no jimmy marks on the doorframe. Just a terrified woman and her increasingly desperate emails. But we know Kanika wasn't crazy. We know she was observing a highly disciplined surveillance team. They were watching the police response times. They were monitoring the entrance to the complex. They knew exactly when to approach her door and exactly when to melt away into the background. This level of coordination requires multiple people, communication devices, and tactical overwatch. It completely contradicts the profile of a standard home invasion. And if you are finding yourself captivated by the dark, twisted reality of this case, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. We dive deep into complex, unsolved mysteries like this every single week, analyzing the evidence that others overlook. For Kanika, the lack of police validation was isolating. She was entirely on her own, trapped in a bureaucratic blind spot where her stalkers hadn't committed a crime severe enough to warrant a protective detail, but were clearly preparing to commit an atrocity. She was essentially a sitting duck, forced to act as her own bodyguard while the system designed to protect her looked the other way. The breakthrough in understanding the sheer scale of this operation comes when we connect Kanika's ordeal to her employment at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. A lot of people hear laboratory and picture scientists in white coats mixing chemicals. But the Applied Physics Lab is essentially a massive, highly classified think tank and research facility for the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, and NASA. They develop advanced weapons systems, cyber warfare capabilities, and classified satellite technologies. Kanika wasn't just a receptionist. She was a security contractor holding a high-level clearance, meaning she had access to sensitive areas, schedules, or personnel data. When you connect the tactical nature of the men at her door to the classified nature of her workplace, the terrifying picture snaps into focus. The fake FBI badges, the coordinated surveillance, the phantom delivery drivers. These are classic, textbook espionage techniques used to breach a target's home. In the intelligence world, it's called a black bag job or a targeted extraction. They weren't trying to rob her. They were trying to get inside her apartment to either interrogate her, acquire something she possessed, or eliminate her without leaving a trace. The realization that this was likely a professional hit squad, possibly state-sponsored or corporate mercenary in nature, elevates the story from a tragic local murder to a chilling national security mystery. The men outside her door weren't random thugs. They were highly trained operatives executing a specific mission profile. And Kanika, sitting alone at her computer, was the only obstacle standing in their way. Let's re-examine that very first knock on the door with this new, terrifying context in mind. When the man claiming to be an FBI agent approached Kanika's apartment, he wasn't just trying a random scam. He was executing a psychological operation designed to leverage authority. He assumed that a young woman, even one with a security clearance, would instinctively defer to federal law enforcement. He expected her to open the door to answer his questions, granting him immediate, uncontested entry into her home. But he miscalculated. He failed to account for Kanika's rigorous security training and her sharp, analytical mind. When she demanded a business card and scrutinized his fake badge, she didn't just annoy him, she blew his cover. She forced the operation to abort its primary entry strategy. This recontextualizes the entire 5-day siege. The subsequent attempts with the fake delivery packages were fallback plans. The operatives were improvising, growing increasingly desperate as their target refused to play along. Every time Kanika locked the deadbolt, every time she sent an email documenting their descriptions, she was effectively fighting a covert war from her living room. She was winning the psychological battle. She was outmaneuvering a team of professional stalkers. But in doing so, she unwittingly backed them into a corner. By refusing to be a soft target, by refusing to be quietly subdued inside her apartment, she forced them to change their parameters. They realized they couldn't trick her. They realized they couldn't breach the door without making a massive scene. So they decided to stop playing games. They decided to wait her out. On Thursday, August 28th, 5 days after the first knock on her door, the siege reached its devastating climax. It was a Thursday afternoon, daylight, in a busy apartment complex. Kanika had been trapped inside for days, living in a state of hypervigilance, surviving on adrenaline and fear. But eventually, the realities of daily life intrude. She had an errand to run. She needed to step outside. Perhaps she thought the coast was clear. Perhaps she thought the men had finally given up after 5 days of failure. She grabbed her keys, unlocked her deadbolt, and opened her front door. But here is the part that changes everything. The men hadn't left. They hadn't given up. They had simply changed their tactics from a breach to an ambush. They were waiting for her in the hallway. The moment Kanika stepped over the threshold, before she could even pull the door shut behind her, they struck. They didn't try to push her back inside. They didn't try to kidnap her. They simply opened fire. Kanika was shot multiple times at point-blank range right there in her own doorway. The gunfire echoed through the building, a sudden, violent explosion of noise after days of silent, creeping dread. Neighbors heard the shots and dialed 911, but the assassins were already gone, melting away into the afternoon sun with terrifying efficiency. When the police arrived, they found Kanika bleeding out in the hallway. But the most chilling detail, the fact that detonates everything we thought we knew about this crime, was found in the door itself. Kanika's keys were still dangling in the lock. Her purse was untouched. Her apartment was unsearched. Nothing was stolen. No money, no electronics, nothing. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This wasn't a botched home invasion. This was an execution. They waited 5 days just for her to open the door, and the second she did, they eliminated her. All the fake badges, the fake packages, the social engineering, it was all just a prolonged preamble to a calculated assassination. The horror of Kanika Powell's murder lies in the agonizing, slow-motion inevitability of it all. For 5 days, she lived through a level of psychological torture that most of us can't even fathom. She wasn't some oblivious victim caught off guard in a dark alley. She was entirely lucid, perfectly aware of the threat that was looming just inches away on the other side of her front door. Kanika documented her own stalking with the cold, clinical precision of a crime scene investigator documenting a murder that hadn't even happened yet. She sent emails to her loved ones with exact descriptions of the men who were hunting her, creating a digital trail of breadcrumbs for an investigation she knew was coming. She did everything right. She locked her doors. She trusted her instincts. She called the police, and she refused to be lured out by clever disguises or fake badges. Yet, the system designed to protect her failed completely. Her own intelligence and training could only delay the inevitable. There's a terrifying implication here that we have to confront. If a highly trained security contractor can be methodically hunted and executed in her own hallway, despite doing everything perfectly, then the sanctuary of home is an illusion. Her killers possessed a level of patience that defies comprehension. They stood in a brightly lit, carpeted hallway of a suburban apartment complex, holding firearms, waiting for hours or even days for a single doorknob to turn. They didn't care about the neighbors or the police presence she had summoned earlier that week. They had a mission, and they executed it with the mechanical precision of a military strike. Kanika knew she was going to die. Her final emails are the digital equivalent of a person watching an executioner sharpen an axe behind a glass wall, screaming for help while the rest of the world goes about its day. She was entirely alone in a crowded building, fighting a war she was never destined to win. Kanika Powell didn't survive the ambush. She was rushed to the hospital, where she fought for her life for several days before her body finally gave out, leaving her family shattered and her community paralyzed by fear. The aftermath was a chaotic swirl of jurisdictional confusion and frustrating dead ends. Despite the incredibly detailed descriptions Kanika left behind, and despite the police reports she filed in the days leading up to her death, the investigation hit a brick wall almost immediately. The composite sketches generated from her descriptions led nowhere. The men seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving behind no forensic evidence, no fingerprints, and not a single strand of DNA in that hallway. The Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory cooperated with the police, but the classified nature of Kanika's work draped a heavy shroud of secrecy over the entire process. Theories began to explode online. Was she silenced because she stumbled onto something she wasn't supposed to see? Was she the victim of a sophisticated identity theft ring? Or was this a terrifying case of mistaken identity by a professional hit squad looking for someone else? To this day, the case remains agonizingly cold. If you want to help keep Kanika's memory alive and bring attention to unsolved cases like hers, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video. The only way to combat the darkness of a crime like this is to shine a massive spotlight on it. Her family is still waiting for answers, still waiting for justice, haunted by the digital echoes of her final days. The story of Kanika Powell forces us to confront an unsettling reality. We surround ourselves with deadbolts, security cameras, and digital firewalls, believing they can keep the darkness at bay. But Kanika's death proves that when a determined, organized threat decides to target you, those barriers are terrifyingly fragile. She left behind a blueprint of her own demise, a tragic record of her intelligence and her bravery. But I want to ask you a question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. What would you have done if a man with a badge knocked on your door, demanding entry? Would you have the courage to keep it locked? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Kanika Powell fought back with the only weapon she had left, the truth. She typed into the void, leaving a legacy of resilience that her killers could never erase. But in the end, no matter how long she waited, the door still had to open. If you want to see more investigations into the world's most mysterious cases, make sure you're subscribed. We won't stop looking for the truth.